They followed him into the mountain, and the town never saw them again. Not one child returned, not one voice was ever heard again. For more than 7 centuries, the people of Hamelin in northern Germany have carried the weight of a story so dark, it's disguised as a children's fairy tale. But what really happened in the summer of 1284? How could an entire generation of children vanish in broad daylight, leaving behind nothing but silence and a scar on history? The legend, as most know it, speaks of a mysterious figure, a man dressed in multicolored clothes, playing a strange flute. He appeared in Hamelin when the town was desperate. Rats swarmed the streets carrying disease, devouring grain, gnawing through wooden beams at night. The piper offered his service. For a price, he would rid Hamelin of the infestation. The desperate townsfolk agreed. What happened next seemed like a miracle. The piper raised his instrument, a shrill melody echoed through the cobbled alleys, and the rats poured from the houses as if bewitched. Hundreds, maybe thousands, followed him to the banks of the river Weser, where they plunged into the water and drowned. The town was saved, but when the piper returned for his payment, the council refused. Some say they mocked him, some say they feared his power. Whatever the reason, the agreement was broken, and on June 26, 1284, the piper played again. This time, not for the rats. This time the music was sweeter, haunting, irresistible. 130 children followed him into the hills, and they were never seen again. That is the fairy tale. But here's the question nobody dares to ask. What if it wasn't a fairy tale at all? Historians, folklorists, and archaeologists have debated this mystery for centuries. In Hamelin itself, a stained glass window once decorated the local church. It showed the piper in his bright clothes, leading the children away. And the inscription that survives is chillingly direct. On the day of St. John, that window, dated to the early 14th century, was not a storybook illustration. It was a record, a piece of memory carved in glass. John and Paul, in the year 1284, 130 children of Hamelin were led away by a piper clothed in many colors, and they were lost. Not a parable, not a metaphor, a fact written in the cold, blunt language of medieval chronicles. But what does lost mean? Some believe the piper was not a magician at all, but a recruiter. In the late 13th century, German rulers sought settlers to colonize new lands in Eastern Europe. Promises of fertile soil and wealth lured entire families eastward. The piper, in this view, was an agent who convinced Hamelin's youth to abandon their homes and migrate. Lost meant lost to the town, not to life. But if that were true, why did no record ever appear of those children founding villages elsewhere? Why did Hamelin itself record the event as a tragedy, not a resettlement? Others suggest a darker explanation. The year 1284 fell within a period of plague, famine, and war. Child mortality was high, and towns often faced collective grief. Some argue the piper was a symbol of death itself, and the children were victims of disease. Perhaps an epidemic claimed them, and the story of a piper was created to give meaning to senseless loss. But would parents, who had buried countless children already, describe death as a man with a flute? Still others whisper of something far more sinister. The mountain where the piper supposedly led the children is real. In local tradition, it is called the Koppen Hill. For generations, villagers claimed they could hear faint laughter and music from within the rocks at night. The site was avoided, feared, said to be cursed. Some excavations even revealed caves and tunnels beneath the hill, stretching into darkness. What if the children were not led away, but taken underground? And what if something waited for them there? Centuries later, the mystery deepened. In the 17th century, Hamelin ISS town records still refused to celebrate weddings or festivals on June 26th, the day of the disappearance. The trauma lived on as if it had happened only yesterday, and travelers who passed through the region wrote of a strange custom. Children were forbidden to sing or play music near the hill where the piper vanished. It was as if the town feared the melody might return. But here's the part nobody expected. In 1957, during construction in Hamelin, workers unearthed skeletal remains beneath the cobblestones. The bones were small, juvenile. Some historians dismissed it as coincidence. Medieval towns often buried the dead within their walls. But others couldn't shake the feeling that these were the children of Hamelin, buried in secret to hide the truth. Were they sacrificed? Were they victims of a cult disguised as a town council? Even stranger was what came next. In 1984, on the 700th anniversary of the disappearance, Hamelin hosted a grand festival to commemorate the tale. Thousands attended, celebrating the piper with parades and music. But as night fell, several witnesses reported hearing a second melody, faint but undeniable, echoing from the direction of Coppen Hill. No musicians were present. Some described it as flutes, others as chanting. The sound lasted only minutes, but it was enough to rekindle the fear that the piper's song had never ended. So who, or what, was the Pied Piper? Some say he was a magician, cheated of his payment, who exacted revenge in the cruelest way possible. Others say he was a stranger, a criminal who abducted Hamelin's children to sell them into slavery far from home. A few suggest he was not human at all, but something older, something that needed children for reasons we dare not imagine. And maybe that's why the story has never died. Because deep down, the people of Hamelin knew the truth was too horrifying to tell. Better to call it a fairy tale, better to let it be a bedtime story, than to admit that on one June day in 1284, something came for their children, and nothing could stop it. Today, Hamelin still exists. It is a quiet German town, known more for tourists than tragedy. But on the old street where the piper was last seen, there are no songs, no musicians, and no laughter. Out of respect, or perhaps out of fear, music is forbidden there. And every year, on the anniversary, the silence feels heavier, as though the town remembers. So I'll leave you with this question. If the piper were to return, if the melody were to drift through your window at night, sweet and irresistible, would you be strong enough to resist it? Or would you too follow him into the darkness, never to be seen again?